You're listening to the No Bullshit Vegan Podcast, episode 152. Writer, editor, trainer, and art maker Jen Sinkler is on the show today. We talk about a few of the things that aren't working in the fitness industry, how we met in a comments thread on Facebook, ableism in the fitness industry, and Jen discusses transitioning her work from the fitness field to the environmental field.
Welcome to the No Bullshit Vegan Podcast. Myth-busting and evidence-based advice to help you kick butt with your health and fitness on a vegan diet. Here's your host, Karina Inkster.
Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Karina, your go-to no BS vegan fitness and nutrition coach. If you're in the Northern Hemisphere like me, I hope you're enjoying your summer so far. It's finally open water swim season here in the Pacific Northwest, so I'm very excited about that. A friend and I just started an open water swim club, so we've been heading out for various ocean adventures lately, which has been fantastic. And if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, like a few of our clients who live in Australia, happy winter, and hopefully you're not freezing your ass off too much at this point. My coaching team and I currently have a few spots available for new clients. We offer inclusive anti-diet coaching for awesome plant-based folks who want to get consistent with their fitness and nutrition. So we'll help you build and stick to your health habits with next-level accountability that, by the way, is way more effective than being workout buddies with your spouse or your cat. So head to karinainkster.com/coaching to check out our programs and to apply for a spot. That's karinainkster.com/coaching. My guest today is Jen Sinkler. She's a writer, editor, trainer, and art maker who lives in Iowa. In recent years, her fitness focus has shifted. She still trains clients occasionally out of a local gym and hosts a weekly collaborative neighborhood workout group, but her focus has expanded to a bigger picture approach. She's been learning about the links between the environment and personal health and writing about that, learning how to organize, and getting involved more locally and on a statewide level with groups such as Iowa CCI, Citizens for Community Improvement, Progress Iowa, and Poweshiek Cares. Jen says Iowa in particular is causing a world of hurt from an environmental perspective because big agriculture is absolutely enormous here. It's one of the most ecologically destructed and destructive places on Earth. Since 2018, Jen has been studying and practicing various forms of visual art, drawing and collage in particular, and she's preparing to launch a greeting cards company with a group of artists from all over. They're called Collective Greetings. Jen's favorite vegan meal is salad. She says, these days, with kale grown in my year 2 garden or a lettuce mix from a nearby homestead, topped with hemp seeds, tempeh, and something for crunch, with great dressing, delicious. Here's our conversation. Hey, Jen, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me and having me back again. Take 2.
Of course. Yeah, we spoke a while back, and then there was a tornado warning, or what do they call it? Is it called a tornado warning? Is it like a tornado alert?
It's tornado watch until it touches down, and then it's warning. So the sirens had just gone off, so off I went to the basement.
Yes, right before we were going to record.
Mm-hmm. Perfect timing. And it's a sunny day today, though, so we're all set.
Well, that's good. That's good. And you're in Iowa, right?
I am. I'm in small town Iowa, southeast Iowa, where I am. I came back to where I'm from, hometown style, and there's so much to love about that.
That's brilliant. Well, we're going to talk about that too and what's going on there and some environmental pieces. But to start things off, just so our listeners have a little bit of a background, you have been in the fitness industry in the past, a fixture writing and coaching and creating programs. And I kind of want to talk about that and the transition into where you are now. But the way that we first met was in a comment thread on someone else's post. So another big name health and fitness person posted something. And honestly, it was a while back, so I can't remember the exact wording, but it was something around how like we all have to prioritize our health. It's kind of like in this vein of another coach that I saw post. It's not optional to have a gym membership. It's a must to have a gym membership. And I'm just like, there's a lot of problems here with this type of messaging. So I don't know if you can remember what the post even was, but it was kind of in that vein, I think.
Yeah, problems and privilege, the PRs of those things, absolutely. Yeah, it was. I think it was along the lines of no excuses. Like your health is everything. If you don't have health, you have nothing. And it was sort of like, hang on a second, like just hang on a second. Like, who aren't you speaking to then? And what are you saying? Like, it's really like the base level of like, what are you saying? If you don't have health, you have nothing. And so the people who can't be healthy, like, and I myself have like entered into a chronic illness condition with long COVID. And so I think, yeah, it's really interesting what doesn't get said and what does get said, and where we aren't digging, or where like the industry, like on the whole, and there's so much great, great unearthing of like the ground we're standing on when it comes to things like deconstructing the fitness industrial complex, that great new book that just came out as a collaboration. And it needs to be, though, these big names that we're speaking of, like, everybody needs to like back up and like, all right, what's Sabrina Strings say about bodies, about judgments, about like, what is the ideal we're striving for? And what else does that mean?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm just reading that book. I think I'm on chapter 2, and it's amazing so far. I took one of Justice's courses around deconstructing the fitness industrial complex, and yeah, it was incredible. It was a really good learning experience. And I'm kind of having flashbacks now. Like, I kind of remember this Facebook thread a little better now that you're mentioning some of these things. And I think you made the point of mental health as well. Like, that wasn't taken into consideration. Things that might prevent folks from being able to go to a gym, for example. There's a lot of things there that could be barriers. And the response was kind of like, well, I can only say so much in a short text-based Facebook post, but I think there's a lot more work that can be done here.
There is a lot more work. And I think that we had this chance. It was around 2016, 17. I mean, when conversations here in the US like broke bigger, on a bigger scale, like just more was revealed about, again, like the base levels. And there was this chance, like all sorts of posts and writings were coming up, at least from the corner of the fitness industry where I was residing at that time. Like, Chrissy King was writing, Kara Stewart Agostino was writing, Steph Dykstra was writing, Elizabeth Akinwale was writing, Sonia Price Herbert was writing about, and all of those are Black women who are like, hey, so like, just so you know, like this is actually the water we're swimming in when it comes to the fitness industry. And again, these are the assumptions about bodies that are getting made. And there was this moment where it felt like, and there have been plenty of reverberations from that, and plenty of like really brilliant work that's come from that. Now, Chrissy King is another one who has written a book that's like really groundbreaking and, move making. And it became very obvious very quickly who was reluctant to have those conversations. And honestly, like I had never, prior to 2015 or so, made generalizations around like men. Like I just never, like cis white, straight, able-bodied men. I never, like I wasn't, batching. And then I started, I'm a late diagnosed ADHD person. And one of the things that I think made me successful in other iterations was this, like, I love the hyperfocus type. It's less squirrel and more like whatever it is one track and all the way in. And so I set about to like having conversations about the readings and the learnings that I was privy to. And the reactions were so similar that I ended up trying to convey that. And I think, I have done many things wrong, or like botched many like communications around this. And I wish I could have a redo, because I would like to. And I can also look back and look at like how highly repetitious and like, and also how I tried to adjust communication every single time, and my early attempts were so soft and so like, and they all are like very much like looking in the mirror too. Like, what did I miss? Why did I miss it? Like, what does that say? Like, what does that mean? But the replication of those conversations was so eerily similar that it felt like I was hearing a script read back to me. Now, white women were more of a mixed bag. There were lots of tears, and some denial, and like, and or like, okay, yeah, yes, and like then heading off into direction. And it just really, like, it's hard to describe how same it was without sound. I still am trying to make sense of it. And I think a lot of those conversations are how I ended up, you pull on one thread and the whole thing unravels. And what's happening in the fitness industry, I think, is very obvious because it happens on the level of body. And so you really get some like literal iterations of judgments and of basis. And, you pull that thread and it leads to climate change. It's the same reason we, powers that be, elected or not, corporate power, there's still the same unwillingness to face consequence, to face really like how we got here. And like the very, and I guess, honestly, I would think on a level I'm speaking to the same concepts that have blown up around critical race theory. That's an accounting, and it really, like, often I've become kind of obsessed with accounting lately. There's a really great Money on the Left editorial collective podcast episode with Paolo Quattrone about accounting and about the art of accounting. Meaning, like, the way accounting was first concepted, it's like, okay, you take stock of what is available in order to solve the problems of the issues at hand, like what's happening in society. So you use the resources and apply to solve problems, rather than this sort of like very stiff, like, less artful version of like numbers. Like, we have to hit this number at all costs with no consequences. And it is like, well, we got here in some very like clear ways that can be accounted for and that need to be accounted for.
Interesting. I want to follow that thread. I like that analogy of, you pull one thread and then it just unravels everything between the fitness industry and other areas like climate change or the environment at large. But do you have some examples or, potential scenarios where you would have said something to someone and then received this similar response? Like, is it about bodies? Is it about access? Is it about diversity? Is it all of those things where you're pointing something out to someone like, hey, this is actually not acceptable?
Yeah, like, and it's sort of all of the above. It could be on anything under an umbrella of like, hey, so when you make comments about fat people, when you share an article that has disparaging remarks about any sort of body, like that, like, back up a step, see what that means. Here's what happened over and over: a conflation between personal and systemic. Because I think, honestly, what's true about most of us, and I'm always including myself first and foremost, like I'm looking at my own, approach to every single thing. But I think we're wildly emotionally immature in our current society. We just haven't put a lot of stock in like receiving feedback, learning how to receive feedback, learning how to do that in a way that doesn't conflate feedback with a personal attack. And so it tended to be that anything, it was immediate defense. It's like that, it's almost like, have you heard of Darvo? Like it's essentially like you reverse the roles from defense to offense. And so it would be like, oh, how dare, like, I would, like, I'm like a lot here's how I support women, or here's how I say, like, me. I would
It's kind of
never.
like the concept of white fragility, right? Like that book about white fragility. That's actually a defense mechanism almost, and it feels like a personal attack when actually it's just feedback.
Right. And it's that, and we've failed to develop a lot of the softer skills that would allow for us to receive feedback in a way that doesn't conflate those issues. And it's really important that we do, and it's really important that we do much, much faster than we are. And yeah, I mean, I have hope, and also I think if we go back to that like 2017 era when really there was an opportunity, especially with people in positions, with white women in positions of exposure. And again, I'm counting myself in this, and I'm thinking particularly of like an event that was run by a women or girls strength organization where at first it was like, okay, you know what, we're going to take stock and again, there's accounting again, of like which men, like who around us is getting into this, is getting into the mix. And that was the direction that we could have and maybe were heading for a second. But then you really get a good view of what organizations are still like, interlaced with a lot of people, with a lot of men who are like, say, in advisorship roles that are then, they're taking it super personally. And so they're saying, no, this is bad business. Go the other way, go the other way. And I was really receiving that feedback. And like, I had my own wake up calls around, like, I was really like, once you cannot unknow, like that's my position on it. And so my writing, what I was interested in, what I was reading, what I was sharing changed completely. And I kept hearing from those in advisor roles with me. It was like, Jen, they don't want that from you. They don't want that from you. And like, whoever they is. And there's a reason, there's a reason. I mean, it's all the same reason over and over. But it could have gone a different way. And then you like watched the backtracking and the sort of, it's like Homer Simpson when he backs into the bush and the bush closes around him. Like
classic.
Yeah, you're just trying to be like then not noticed or not rock the boat or not. It's like it's a different look at like the sort of like, I remember, I'm thinking about Kate Mann, who is a philosopher and wrote this really great book I loved called Down Girl. And she was talking about, I think in her subsequent book, talking about Brett Kavanaugh and when he was faced with rape charges or rape allegations of rape, then he became extremely angry, and that anger, all women are conditioned, to like react to anger in a way that that kowtows a little bit, and I think that's sort of like the same dynamic of like, so in the beginning to speak out, and then the receiving of like negative feedback like that, how dare you and not me, and like it's always, I started thinking about it as like as a counterpoint to the Me Too movement begun by Tarana Burke, as like a not Me Too movement, like not Me Too, it's not Me Too, and that became that at least operationally seemed like the most important thing was to not be lumped in. And so I had begun in these conversations, and I mean hundreds and hundreds, I am nothing if not willing to repeat. And that, that was part of fitness philosophy too, honestly, like it always is, like just always like a little bit different, but like willing to repeat. It just came up the same thing again and again and again. And I think I just lost my train of thought. Hello, ADHD.
Oh, that's okay. It's all good. Well, I assume that these reasons are partially, if not mostly, why your work has taken a different direction. But let's backtrack a little bit to, Jen from, I don't know, let's say 10 years ago, in the height of fitness career, creating fitness programming, writing. Tell me a little bit about what that work was like when you were in it. I mean, I think you had a program that I might have even signed up for years ago.
Was it
you on the Bigness Project?
Yes, Courtney Thomas's program. Yes, that was our hypertrophy program.
Yeah, exactly. So what was that like? Like, what kind of work were you doing at that point?
Well, and that was, I was in a sort of fitness publishing role at that point. And so I entered the fitness industry in 2003 as a fitness editor. And very shortly after realized that, I had a background as an athlete and used to play rugby for a number of teams, including the U.S. team for 7s and 15s. Love rugby, and honestly, I credit women's rugby. Let me be clear. Women's rugby, the culture of women's rugby is a really beautiful community, like queer and accepting, and like it's the sport that not only like accepts but desires and requires all body types. Like you need somebody for every job. And so but I needed, as an athlete, I was like, do it like this. And I realized I couldn't even write an exercise description at that point. So I started taking fitness certifications and training under different, like Jason C. Brown and Pamela McElry and Robert Dos Remedios, and spending a lot of time like learning how they were coaching. And it was such a great experience. I worked for Experience Life magazine for just about a decade, and it's a fitness magazine. I think they've moved a little bit toward a membership magazine now. It is published by the gym chain Lifetime Fitness, but at the point I worked for them, there was a large subscriber base outside of the gym members as well. So had a reach of about 3 million, and we had a long leash. We got to do and pursue. Because we didn't have to worry about ad content. There's like the tension between advertising and editorial, and we just kind of didn't have to deal with a lot of that, or the ways we did. Our editor-in-chief, Pilar Gerasimo, at that point, she shut down even ads for diet soda. That was like a no, because we can't be writing articles about the dangers and the consequences of like things like aspartame, and then have ads for Diet Coke. Like, it just doesn't work. And so I think that I like developed an antagonism, or maybe already had a natural antagonism with that relationship. And then, it was 2013, the very beginning of 2013, I went out on my own and sort of assumed a fitness publisher role with the skills that I had developed at the magazine. And so got to work with a range of like really brilliant coaches and put out their programs, and also put out my own, which was Lift Weights Faster. And that's like the repetition thing. Like, it really was like Lift Weights Faster at any and every speed. And it is, as far as patterns go, like, yes, like we do need to return to basic patterns, push, pull, hinge, lunge. And I know I really love the fitness content you put out. May I just say, like, love it.
Oh, thanks.
Love it.
Well, thanks.
And yes, it's a return to those patterns, but I don't think it has to be the same. I think it can be just a little bit different every single time. And like for me, I need high variety even within the patterns. And I got to learn at that point, like, just how far you could go under that like sort of model. And I look back, and I have shut down my fitness websites at this point. But I was writing for Men's Health, Women's Health, and a range of other fitness magazines at that point. But by 2014, I was writing rebuttals to my own fitness articles. Like, I had because of the edits that got made. In 2014, I think it was an article on the beauty of women lifting weights. And at that point, at that juncture, there was still, and the waters changed quite a lot, and for a whole host of reasons, including CrossFit as a mixed bag. But one of the positives was, how much that opened some doors for women lifting weights. And I think that like a lot of us did a lot of really like great work in that area. And one of my fitness features, like by the time it got published, the headline said "Strong is the new skinny." And that was not, I can't then share that article and be like, yeah, see, look, without also saying like, this is what happens behind the scenes at a magazine when you've got editors who are trying to meet, who they think their audience is. And I have a lot of questions around audience. And Adele Martinez Jackson had said she's got a lot of questions about at the end of the day, there is no audience. Like, every single one person is an individual. So you really can't like package, for a general audience. And I think that you do a lot can go sideways when you're trying to not upset or like meet the expectations of a certain audience, or like judging what people are and are not ready to hear.
Right. That's a good point. I can relate to that as well in the writing world. There was an article one time that I wrote for a magazine that ended up coming out side by side with another article as a pro and con piece, unbeknownst to me.
No.
They didn't even tell me that it was going to be like a, side of I think it was about nutrition or macros or something. I mean, that is not professional editorial behavior. And also on that note, though, I mean, there's things that I have written for sure that did not get edited from years back that I cringe at. You know, in my first book, which came out in 2014, I used terms like, I think clean eating is in there at least once. And that's not a term I use at all. And, you know, I mean, I think this just kind of shows the process of how the industry itself is changing, but we as individuals also can learn new things and we can adjust and, you know, kind of figure out as we go along better ways of communicating.
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, that's the goal, right? Like I look back and have the same sort of like, ooh, no. And for me, there's a lot around like, I can remember, you know, I remember these like underlying feelings of like, I remember being at a fitness conference once and walking into a room just in time to hear it was a kettlebell session. And I walked into the room just in time to hear the instructor say, if your back hurts, it's your fault. You're doing it wrong. It's like,
oh, yikes.
Yeah, like, nah, form is like everything else, really specific to the individual. And there's like it's not a cookie cutter situation, and it shouldn't be a cookie cutter situation. And I think there's a desire and a wish that I really understand for like spoon feeding answers and clear cut, you know, situations where it's like, this is right and this is wrong, but it's not the reality, and it can't be, and it shouldn't be, and we shouldn't really want it to be.
That's a good point. So how did you transition from that work, like the writing, the publishing, the programming, into the work that you do now?
I mean, honestly, kind of a breakdown, because I had no experience in organizing whatsoever when I first, and you can see even like the way I described what I was doing, it was like on a very individual basis. So which that has to be part of it. And relationships are like at the core of everything always. But it was very much like, I'm going to go talk to these. I was trying to leverage what would have been, you know, at that point, to borrow a term from Seth Godin, like sort of a famous in the family orientation or like exposure. And it didn't go the way I hoped or thought, or like, I was very naive about it. And again, like taking these swings on an individual basis. And by the time I was like, all right, I really need to figure out a different way to use my time, because I just felt like I was not being effective, not, you know, burning up some relationships that I wouldn't have wanted to because I was pushing hard. Or maybe, you know, I look and I'm like with control dynamics, or, you know, I always like, I'm trying to figure out where I can adjust my own behavior. And so it's how I ended up back in Iowa, honestly. Felt like I needed to come home and get healthy, and mentally and emotionally, I feel like, yep, I got to do that. And I've gotten to learn a lot about organizing on a local level and really figure out, I'm in a really small community, and it reminds me, I'd moved here from Philadelphia. It honestly reminds me of Philadelphia in a lot of ways. Like you can live like a really whole, complete, beautiful life in a 2-block radius where you have everything or most of what you need. And so there are so many similarities in communities, and like it would be like a neighborhood reflection in Philly, but in ways that things work. And I also have gotten a much better look at the ways that things don't work, and like how that breaks down. And I just couldn't turn the channel. Like once I was like, these dynamics are built into all of this stuff, all of it. And Iowa, while I've gotten healthy in certain ways, like physically, my health has taken quite a hit. And I don't think that it is only due to COVID. We are the most ecologically damaged state in the nation, to borrow a phrase from the executive director of Great Plains Action Society, Secaucus Nobis. And she's right. I mean, we have poisoned and eradicated topsoil. Our water is absolute garbage. Like there are so many particulates in the air, and family farms have been decimated. The way that agriculture is done now here and everywhere, but here there is an extremely outsized impact because of the herbicides, the fungicides, the pesticides. I mean, planes and helicopters and drones are going by all the time, spraying. I didn't realize, because I'm from a farm extended family here, but not like my immediate family was, while we are in a small town. I just didn't know about, I didn't grow up touring or anything like that. And so I didn't know about the processes involved, and they've changed so much. Even in the last 5-10 years, we are decimating animal species. There is an entomologist. He ended up, Jonathan Lundgren is his name, and I'm a huge fan of his work. He ended up kind of getting ousted, my understanding is, from the USDA because he was in sort of a whistleblower role, because he was like, well, the way we're doing agriculture it's wiping out insects. And what he says is like, as go the insects, so go we. And his estimate is that we have literally 10 years left of life on Earth. And it is that serious what we're doing. And I think I credit Aaron Brown with a lot of where and what I've learned in terms of like scale of change. And she had been organizing for a great long time, and I hadn't. And so a lot of it like really did, I think it was a real shock to me. And once I knew, I was like, this is a huge scale change. And I think that a lot of white feminism focuses on like, just do a little bit, just do a little changes, just a little bit of what you can. But like the word can isn't really interrogated or expanded, like is more possible. And what we need are more eyes on the bigger picture, like less like obsession with like, murder podcasts, and more like, okay, how do we like really shift on a bigger scale? Like, how do we demand change? We can't just keep doing all of the things that we're doing. Down to Iowa politics are particularly messy. Like in Iowa gets overlooked. I mean, we're a flyover state as it is, but some of what's happening here is some of the nastiest around, like truly some of the nastiest around. Our legislature just passed some child labor laws, for instance. And like Iowa's at the forefront of that. Like it's a really interesting place in that it's a high impact place. The ways that we do agriculture here, for example, like leads to like about half of the pollution in the upper Mississippi River Basin, 60% of the Missouri River Basin. So, which means that we are the largest contributor to the dead zone. And the algal blooms that are happening down there, like that's Iowa. We have 5% of the land mass, but such a huge outsized impact. And Iowa's impact is enormous on a number of scales. Like for instance, like at University of Iowa, the writing program there, I think seeded something like, I might be misquoting this, and hold me to this exactly, but our writing program seeded the writing programs of, I don't know, something like 50% of the other programs like emerged from here. And we've always had like this, like it's kind of a gender bendy place in ways that are really hard to explain. And one of the reasons I came back was like, okay, I want some I was like very literal about the do-over. And also it felt really like interesting to discover the ways that every place has language, and the language that I knew from having grown up here, down to like, you got to know when to look when you wave at somebody in the car. Like it's all, and like in order to be, because when you're like from a small town, like you've got to, everybody knows everything, or a lot of people know a lot of things. And so you've got to like, you turn your head at a particular point in order to time it exactly right. And it's one of the determinants for like, do you know the language? Oh gosh, I lost my train of thought again because I got excited about the waving.
Well, your work now is in this realm, right? More environmental, dietary choices, how they affect the environment, climate change. So what are some of the things that you're working on currently?
Well, I am working on a lot about water health. I've gotten involved with a number of local organizations. Powesheet Cares for one, like Iowa CCI, which is Citizens for Community Improvement. And it's trying to take a look at it. Like, I mean, it's all about, for me now, trying to take a look at the bigger picture of what we're doing, and we have to get plugged in. And I'm trying to leverage my skills as an editor and like translator of sorts. And that's not to depower being on the receiving end of any sort of information. I mean, it's all like, come get involved, but it is breaking down the concepts of like what is happening, because I think we would like to think that we're being taken care of in X, Y, or Z way. Like, oh yeah, like they know, and so I don't have to plug into that. That was me. I up to 8 years ago, I was like, well, I guess I'm not going to be a politics person. I'm just not gonna. But since I've like learned to lobby, and I've gotten to speak to some of our representatives here, like for instance, there are a lot of industries here that are being propped up based on surplus crops. Like we are the #1 producer of corn, of soybeans, and of eggs. Now I'm not counting eggs as surplus, but like I live 8 miles south of 10 million chickens, and I now know the smell of chicken shit when it's just spread all over the fields, untreated, antibiotic and disease-laced manure, and it washes straight into the river. The systems as they're set up with farm subsidies, the farmers are going, and they're often renting land. It's harder and harder to rent land. The vast, vast, vast majority of farmers here are white, like down to the 99th percentage. Sylvia Secchi, who's a researcher out of the University of Iowa, has a lot to say about a lot of this. But I'm trying to write my friggin' face off and get involved with like organizations like Progress Iowa, and like, let's figure out how more of us can get involved on a broader scale. Like we have to plug in. The consequences are nothing short of life and death. And we don't have the kind of time that, even if you don't buy into the 10-year cycle, we've had just the weirdest weather, and it is, and it's not just about like the acute instances. It is a creep, and it's a not so slow creep, and we're crossing all sorts of thresholds. So it really is an emergency situation, and there's just not a possibility for me, I don't think, to go about any sort of business as usual that doesn't involve alert, 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 alert. And I think that this is maybe part for me of ADHD and other neurodivergences too. When I was saying, hey, it's fun to lift weights, like come on over, like that was easy to support. And then it became less easy to support when I was like, hey, we have to change almost everything about the way we do everything. Then it's like, look away and and go away, please. And I do get that. And I do hear myself being like, I'm not perfect at messaging. And I do want to like say again and again, I'm like talking about me too. I'm looking at myself too. I'm looking at myself first. And what kind of changes can we work to get? Like everybody deserves to eat. In here, the Iowa legislature, I keep saying that wrong, are cutting SNAP benefits, are making it really difficult to apply for assistance. They putting up more and more barriers to help. And we haven't, I learned recently here too, the unhoused population, like the sort of unofficial way of dealing with someone who shows up who needs that kind of help is to take them to the county line, keep them moving. And at some point, at all points, like it's got to shift. We've got to like get more involved. More of us have to get more involved on every level. So I'm trying to, for myself, that ends up being writing. Though I will say like the organizing, like in all sorts. I'd never made signs and gone to the Capitol and, again, like spoken directly to legislature. Now I'm supposed to say legislators. Anyway, so yeah, we'll see where it goes. I'm interviewing for some jobs right now that would specifically speak to rural issues, because we are, Iowa in particular, like we are in a sacrifice zone. And I do think for us, it has to do with and so most of our small towns, which that's really to me like the beautiful part about Iowa, like these these towns where the care network is so visible, and like there you come up with systems. And Imani Perry, who wrote this, has written a great, number of brilliant books, but South to America, while she was promoting South to America, she was talking about some of the similarities between the Midwest, the U.S. Midwest and the U.S. South. And one of the things she said was that country people know how to fold in difference. And I think that's really true, like, because you really, you're dealing with the same people. There is no option to be absorbed in like in a larger community. It's like, this is who's here. And so this is who you're dealing with. And so this is who you learn to deal with and like love and accept and, be with. Now, there is a real edge to that can involve whether you're from here or not. And there are plenty of problems too, the same sorts of problems that are everywhere are here. And the way you can see it, really see it, is that is true. What Imani Perry is saying is true. Like, you learn to fold in difference and respect and uplift that, which is as it should be.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. You mentioned the larger systemic changes that need to happen, on a grand scale in terms of things like agriculture and anything environmental related, probably things like subsidies and just the system in general. What about the smaller actions that still can make a difference that I think we should also consider, not at the exclusion of the larger systemic changes, of course? But last time we chatted, we talked about things like dietary changes and, eating more plant-based as a way of addressing some of these issues. Where are you at with the individual action side, particularly when it comes to dietary choices?
Ooh, that's such a good question. Well, and on the topic of individual choices, is it Alana Johnson? It's How to Save a Planet podcast. She was the co-host, and there was an episode about individual choice in particular. And she had said, because, one person's actions really, can be like, well, it doesn't matter what I do, which is true, from a certain vantage point. But what she said was where it starts mattering is the ripples. Like, so yes, it doesn't matter if you yourself don't fly, but it can matter if a culmination occurs or like a replication of that occurs, the conversation and the sort of the building, which to me is really inspiring. And thank you, by the way, for the work you do around nutrition, because you've influenced me greatly when it comes to making more vegan choices, as well as, for several years prior, like a couple friends in Minnesota had been like, hey, so you're going to want to start looking at this more because of the consequence of what it takes to in this, animal cruelty, of course, and also resources. And part of what's happening here is like unsustainable industry gets propped up from, the waste products coming out of, like, say, all sorts of plants. Like now the latest is like there's a soybean crushing plant because biofuel, and the soybean, like some of the waste product goes to feed animals that are in the CAFOs, the concentrated animal feeding operations, where they're just packed in there and packed full of antibiotics to keep them just barely not sick enough to, and still there's like
Right.
bird flu. There's like, it's just an absolute mess. And I think that it's like that concept that I think Alana Johnson had referred to is it is like on an individual basis. Yeah. Like you're not going to say, make a dent, and together we can and will, if we can, pass along and communicate and work together more and more and more. And this is my second year growing a garden.
That's an interesting idea.
I know, right? And it makes sense. I mean, it's like everything else. I'm trying to learn how to grow food and grow salad in particular. Last year, I planted a bunch of kale and ended up, I'm still laughing about one of my friends who'd been driving through on her way back home to California. And I made some kale salad last summer, and she was like, "This tastes so green," and she meant it as a compliment.
Of course.
We still mess. Yeah, and like this year, got the kale in again. I forgot again to mark the green beans. I have a wasabi arugula that I am so excited about. And yeah, and butterhead lettuce. And you do see some of the smaller farmers. Like there's a garden oasis farm up in northern Iowa that grows an immense amount of food on 10 acres. And there's a new 4-story hydroponic butterhead lettuce, like with a drive-through salad restaurant in, I think, Ames, Iowa.
Oh,
And
cool.
yeah, right. And like there's all these opportunities to grow real food again. Because as it is right now, we're not growing real food. I remember, it wasn't even so many years ago when I came home, and people who come to or through Iowa, they're like, "Oh, this is so much corn," but they're picturing that as sweet corn, and it's not sweet corn, it's field corn. Like you can't eat it. And in fact, it's 50 or 60% is burned up for ethanol. And ethanol is a fuel that, while it gets billed as a greener choice, that's only accounting for what comes out of your tailpipe. It does not account for the ways that it is farmed. It doesn't account for all of the many, petro heavy ways that it's grown. Excuse me, the pollution, like the detrimental effects to the water, to the air, to people. I have this is a sneak preview, I guess. I hear from a researcher here in Iowa that there is a paper working itself through, I believe, the USDA that talks about specifically Iowans developing a very strong resistance to antibiotics because of what washes into our water. Because again, like the waste, the untreated waste that gets applied to all these fields gets washed into the water. There's just no way that we can out-treat what is happening. And this is Sylvia Secchi again, says that Iowans spend money on water 3 times. They pay polluters to pollute, then they pay the water systems to clean the water, and then they pay to buy water that's not from here. And it's true. And when I had started getting sick, like my health I clawed a little bit back when I stopped drinking the water, when I stopped eating meat from CAFOs, when I really started looking, at like the individual choices that I was making, and I was able to see a difference like on a personal level.
Well, I think those are often what keep folks going. I mean, the larger ideological reasons and, the concept that you're talking about here of the collective actions of individuals making a difference, which we see in the vegan world all the time, by the way, right? How many more vegans there are now, or just people who are eating more plant-based, not even 100%. It's making a difference in what's being offered in the market. It's making a difference to individual companies. We've heard multiple times of dairy farmers or companies switching over into being like almond milk producers or oat milk producers or whatever, just based on market demand. So clearly, we as a collective, as consumers, are having a difference here or making a difference here. But I think what you're talking about from a personal level, like, oh, well, I notice health effects, and I notice how I'm feeling, and I notice how these choices have changed my illness. Those are pretty important to keep in mind, because they keep people going long enough to influence others to do the same thing. And then we have this collective.
Yes, exactly that. And it's like, okay, so if you need the personal threat, well, global warming and COVID, like that combination, like is leading to a huge spike in like resistant fungal infections, for example. Like this isn't always going to be a catastrophic thing. It's just like, oh, do you want what is the show? I have not watched it. I'm not a fan of horror, to be honest. But what is it? The fungus? No.
Oh,
not the fungus among us.
Yeah,
although that is a good article
right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's just
like, what you mean. I watched the show and I can't even think of the title.
That's how it goes, right? Sometimes I'm like, did I watch that?
Yeah. But yeah, it's an interesting point where the individual actions need to be motivated, I think, on an individual level. Like, we need to feel that we're doing something that's positive for ourselves. Just as humans, it's kind of how our brains work. But we also can know at the same time that they're affecting something larger.
Yeah, that's super well said.
So what are some things that are coming up for you? Projects, things you're working on, things you want to change in Iowa? I mean, I'm sure this is a loaded question because there's probably like 15 of them.
There are 15 of them, but that's the best. That's the best. Like a lot going on. I might head to Southern Iowa. There is an opportunity to do some writing in a county that is less red and maybe more prone to changing tunes. I'm also working on an art project, again with a reference to Secaucus Nobis with Great Plains Action Society. She was like, do not overlook the impact that art can have. And so there's a group, there's a collective, we're calling ourselves Collective Greetings. We are going to be a greeting card company. And we're going to try to get some education out around different issues, around water, around air, around soil, around food, and produce greeting cards that and come up with a subscription system. We're going to print locally and also use that as ways to raise money for, like, as federal funds dry up, or as like we've got a governor who sends back federal funds instead of passing the money along to Iowans. She wants to prove who knows what, how tough she is, how tough we are, which I think is actually part of the problem with like the Midwest toughness. Like we're toughing out too much, shouldn't actually have to be doing this. So I'm trying to figure out ways to work in team that helps to create new types of system where we can build our own sorts of ecosystems. I mean, I am constantly thinking about like the luck that I didn't have with, like, nobody likes a critic, or like that's a rougher road. I think that's really, I mean, I love critics. I love critics and learn so much from them. And there has to be a good deal of building as well. So I'm trying to put my eggs in an art basket and see what we can do to send messages out in different form and different possibilities.
Wow, that's exciting. I did not know about this art project.
I'm excited about it. Yeah, it's a bunch of us who really like haven't been able to, or are having a tough time fitting into a particular, and so we're trying to figure out new ways that we can operate that also honor our own energy, availability, and ability for a whole host of things, and that leverage like each of our individual strengths as well. Like it's a very like egalitarian, like there is no like hierarchy. It is people are coming in as they can with the skills that they have.
That's brilliant.
It's great. And like there's so much, I mean, the art is blowing my mind.
That's amazing. Well, Jen, it was great to speak with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Much appreciated.
Thank you for having me and for doing the work that you do. This was a lot of fun.
Jen, thanks again for speaking with me today. Fantastic to have you on the show. Head to our show notes at nobullshitvegan.com/152 to connect with Jen. And don't forget to check out my coaching programs at karinainkster.com/coaching. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the No Bullshit Vegan podcast at nobullshitvegan.com.